Now, everybody in this room has too much to do, too much on their plate. They're saying, what does she want me to do? Go out there and run for city council or start marching on Washington? It sounds like a burden, but in fact, it is our responsibility, which makes it a joy and a freedom. Why? Well, that sounds pretty nuts. I don't want one more responsibility. Quickly tell you the story of Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian. He was a psychiatrist. He was also a Jew. Lost virtually his entire family during World War II in the concentration camps. Found himself imprisoned, and during those moments began to write in his head what he was learning, what he would teach when he returned to the university. Determined that he in fact would survive and succeed. And he found something extraordinary. In the most heinous moments of torture and degradation, by stepping out of the situation mentally, removing himself, he found freedom. They could destroy his body, but they could not capture him. And in that, he came up with a couple of principles. He discovered that between stimulus and response, the torture, his response, he had a moment in time where he had complete freedom to choose his response. He absolutely could choose whether to succumb or whether to remain free. And he did so. And in that, he redefined the word responsibility. It was simply the ability to respond. Now, that's an extraordinary notion, because as we are disaffected and disillusioned, we're giving up our responsibility. We can't do it. Everything is outside our reach, and what we're giving up is the ability to respond to circumstances that do not go as we would like them to go. Things that are not turning out, whether it be in the family, the community, the workplace, or our government, as we would like them. We are abdicating power to make change in the world. And it's extraordinary because we all have that right here, right now with us. Let's give you the easy example. Let's say I come down to you and say, I don't know what you did last night, but you must have been out way too late because you look terrible. And she's got a very serious look on her face. You look marvelous, darling. I'm just picking on you. In fact, what should she do? Now, I'm an external stimulus. If she goes, oh my God, I look terrible, what in the world is she letting me do that to her for? How many of you look out the window and if it's raining, you're depressed? If it's sunny, you're happy? What in the world are you letting the weather change who you are and what you are? We are constantly being told we don't have a role in government. We cannot bring about monumental change. And yet it's not true. We do have the ability to respond. Ask Nobel Prize winner Jody Williams, who lives in a little cabin in Maine, who created a ban on landmines around the world all by herself on the internet. All by herself on the internet. Just extraordinary. But she knew. She had the ability to respond. She had something she was going to change, and by George, she turned the world upside down. Now, I had this wonderful phrase that has always meant a great deal to me, and I would rally around it when I needed boosting, when I needed to remember what I'm saying to you is true. It was a statement by anthropologist Margaret Mead. She said, you know, the world, never forget that the small number of people can change the world, because in fact that's the only way it ever has. A small number of people can change the world. That's the only way it ever has. Very empowering, right? Well, all of a sudden, a couple of months ago, it took on a whole new meaning for me. I was sitting on the runway out at Newark Airport, waiting to fly to the West Coast at 8:47 a.m. And I looked out the window and saw one of the World Trade Towers in smoke. And we all on the plane said, my God, who's going to run a little, what? Didn't know what to do, sat and watched, and we watched the second plane hit the towers. Now, the plane that went into the ground in Pennsylvania took off about 30 minutes before my flight was to leave. And we know what happened there. What came home to me was two things. One, 19 people, 19 hijackers were able to kill thousands, cost this country billions of dollars, shut down our entire transportation system, and bring fear into the heart of every American and an awful lot of people around the world. 19 human beings. If 19 people can do that, imagine what 1 million or 10 million or 260 million people can do if they're committed to change the world. As horrific as that day was for all of us, there was a piece of good news, and that was it. And on the heels of these events, we heard it coming out of the mouths of our politicians. All of a sudden, it wasn't the military that could save us. We didn't have a bunch of rules or regulations or institutions that could come out and work for us. Who was it? Well, it was the firefighters. It was the cops. It was the EMS workers. It was volunteers who I saw there in the city lining up to bring sandwiches or bring water or open their homes for people who were wandering the streets covered from head to toe in dust, who lined up for miles to give blood. The people across this country who instantaneously responded. We raised over $300 million in the 2 weeks after this event. $300 million! Now, my God, if we could all put our pennies and quarters together to respond to the victims of 9/11 that quickly, why can't we fix all the problems facing us? Give me one reason why we can't do that for other problems in this country. Nobody in this room can. Because it's simply whether or not we express a dedication and whether or not we act upon that sensation. That's all it takes. And what we heard from the Secretary of Defense really brought it home to me. When we were going to send out the troops, when we were going to respond to this, what did he do? He sent a handful of commandos. You know, he didn't send over the entire army. We followed up with little bombing and a few military apparatus after that. But the first guys in there were literally a handful of commandos. And what Rumsfeld said was, where we're lacking is not high-tech stuff, not the big weapons, not the future Star Wars enterprise to go on in our space system. He said, what we're missing is human intelligence. What we need is people who speak Farsi, people who can hit the streets in the Middle East and blend in. My God, John Walker was able to blend in and meet Osama bin Laden. Somebody want to tell me why the CIA can't do the same thing? Because they're all sitting in their offices, hanging out in the embassies, not speaking the language in the countries they exist in, governed by rules and regulations that tell them they cannot talk to anybody that is disreputable or beyond our code of conduct. In other words, we've let our intelligence system go right down the toilet. But the important thing was, he said, that's what we need. We need people. One person here and one person there. It was one Egyptian double agent that stopped the bombing at the Holland Tunnel in New York a couple of years ago. One person who staved off a similar incident to 9/11. That would have killed thousands, would have turned the city upside down. So what we're talking about here is understanding that we have the ability to respond, and secondarily, taking the hardest step of all, and the step that is leaving us and abandoning us all along the way. And that is acting upon that understanding. Because all of the knowledge, the experience, the enthusiasm, the degrees that exist in this room, all of that put together is worthless if you do nothing with it. If you do not act upon it, it means nothing. You can talk in your meetings. You can have your conferences. You can all pat each other on the back. But if you don't go home and put it to use, if you don't exercise what you know and what you've learned, this time has meant nothing. And the same thing holds true for our role as citizens.